Hear God. That is our subject. Child of God, beloved, God is a speaking God. From the beginning, God has been speaking. In the beginning, it said God spoke, and that which was not became that which is. God spoke in the universe, and all that we know it was formed. God spoke in inorganic material. Listen, and 100 billion galaxies were formed. Those billions of galaxies hold 300 billion stars, and those 300 billion stars hold an unfathomable number of planets, some 70 trillion. God spoke, and the universe listened and obeyed. God spoke, and more stars than grains of sand on this planet came into being. God spoke, photons and luminescent particles listened, and light began to shine. God spoke, two hydrogens got together with one oxygen, and he heard his voice and formed water. God spoke, and some nitrogen hooked up with oxygen, argon, carbon dioxide, they all listened together and made the air that we breathe. God spoke, in 53 different elements merged themselves together and formed dirt. They listened to God, and then carbon-based organic material listened, and plants and trees began to grow out of those 53 elements that we now call dirt. God spoke, and stuff listened. God spoke, and the stuff and some scales and fins listened, and fish began to swim. God spoke, bones and feathers came together and started flying in the air. God spoke, and fur and claws began to roam through the earth, called bears and animals. Our God is a speaking God, and when he speaks, creation responds. God has designed it so that his creation can hear him. God is a speaking God. Not only does God speak in nature, he speaks to humanity. God speaks through his creation to humanity. Romans 1:20 says, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. God speaks, and his creation declares his glory. The psalmist says in Psalms 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies speak and proclaim the works of his hands. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard, the psalmist said. Beloved, God is speaking. The Hebrew writer says it like this in Hebrews chapter 1. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in the last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things. And through him also he made the universe. God spoke, and he still is speaking, beloved, and he wants to speak to you. He just wants you to hear him. He hasn't stopped speaking. We just have selective ears. God wants to speak new life into your soul. God wants to speak encouragement into your spirit. God wants to speak his direction, his correction, his love, his words of encouragement. He wants to speak words of grace and words of mercy to your soul. God wants to speak to you because you are his child, and God has a plan for your life. God has purpose for your existence, and he wants you to hear what he has to say. I believe my God is a speaking God, and since God is a speaking God, we need to learn how to be a hearing people. Hearing is that process of taking in information, while speaking is a process of sending out information. If the information can't go in, then the information can't go out. If you can't hear it, you have a hard time trying to say it. In the natural, as the old folks say, you were given 2 ears and 1 mouth. As that lets you know that listening is twice as important as talking. And these ears that we are given are important in the natural and physical world, so that we may be able to hear things, and our hearing respond to them in speech. Speech and hearing go hand in hand. Many who have trouble hearing also have trouble speaking. People learn to speak by hearing sounds and then tuning their voice to those sounds. When one can't hear, one is unable to tune or calibrate their voice to the proper sound, and thus they are guessing if it sounds right what they're saying. People don't even realize how important hearing is until they lose their hearing. We take it for granted most of the time, but do you even know that your ears are even responsible for your ability to balance yourself. It's hard to align yourself when you have damaged ears. If something happens to your ears and the fluid in your ears is compromised, you will have a hard time standing and walking straight, let alone trying to communicate. If your hearing is off, you will struggle to keep yourself straight. If your ears are messed up, you're going to be out of line, off balance. And beloved, I've come to realize that when our spiritual hearing is off, we struggle to balance our lives. When our spiritual hearing is off, we don't walk as straight as we should. We don't live as right as we should. When we find ourselves lost and off balance. When our spiritual hearing is off, we struggle to hear God. We do things that are not in line with his purpose. When we fail to hear God, we don't even know there's danger up ahead. When we fail to hear God, we struggle to discern his voice and make the same mistake over and over again. When we can't hear God, we don't hear that that person is going to break our heart until it's too late. When we struggle to hear God, we don't see how that problem will become an addiction, and that addiction will ruin our lives. When we struggle to hear God, we fail to hear the good news of Jesus Christ. When we struggle to hear God, we fail to hear the words that you can get a second chance and that you don't have to quit and you don't have to throw in the towel, because God is a God of mercy and God is a God of grace. When we struggle to hear God, we start to hear a whole lot of stuff other than what is good. When we struggle to hear God, Donald Trump sounds like he has all the answers. When we struggle to hear God, the gangbangers seem like they have all the answers. When we struggle to hear God, that 2-bit rapper talking about bankrolls and range rolls seems like he has all the answers. When we struggle to hear God, Future looks better than Russell. That's for the young folk. I thought I'd throw that out there. That's free of charge. When we struggle to hear God, that dude in the club that spends more money on his rims and Timbs than his 3 or 4 kids, he sounds good. When we struggle to hear God, the same old thing that isn't working sounds better than trying the new thing. When we struggle to hear God, our lives are not in tune. Our walk is offbeat, and our souls don't harmonize with the plan of God and the music that God is playing in the universe. We struggle to hear God, but can I help you?